Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission du format Super Friends. C'est le podcast dans lequel on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. On vous en avait parlé depuis longtemps et on a mis un petit peu de temps à la mettre en ligne et pour cela, je vous présente toutes mes excuses. Dans cette émission, nous serons en compagnie de l'autrice Marjorie Liu, à qui l'on doit notamment la série Monstress qu'elle fait en compagnie de Sana Takeda. C'est une série de fantasy, dark fantasy avec des éléments de steampunk, quelque chose d'assez atypique et surtout une série qui a été nommée et récompensée aux Eisner Awards de multiples fois parce que c'est un travail franchement fantastique, disponible d'ailleurs en 8 tomes pour l'instant aux éditions Delcourt et que je vous encourage vraiment plus que jamais à aller découvrir. Je pense que c'est vraiment une série dont on ne parle pas assez en France et c'est une première occasion de vous remettre ce travail en avant. Marjorie Liu qui était de passage en France au printemps dernier puis au festival Facts, donc c'est une interview qu'on a enregistrée en Belgique, donc disponible en anglais, mais vous avez une retranscription qui est aussi en français sur le site comicsblog.fr pour lequel on a aussi un petit échange avec Sana Takeda. Voilà, le générique va se lancer. Je vous rappelle que si vous appréciez ce podcast et ce genre d'émission, c'est super important de soutenir à la fois pour le podcast en tant que tel, mais aussi pour faire découvrir le travail des artistes qui y viennent. Et je vous laisse en anglais en compagnie de Marjorie Liu d'ici quelques secondes. Thank you first for giving me a little bit of your time. So Marjorie, so this is the first time that we have to we speak together in this podcast. So I'm always obliged to start with the most basic question. I'm really sorry about that, but
worries.
Could you introduce yourself to the people who might not know who you are?
Oh, sure. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. My name is Marjorie Liu, and I am a comic book writer and a novelist. Also a former attorney, but I've been writing comics now probably since 2006, 2007. I started out at Marvel. I wrote X-23, NYX, Black Widow, Dark Wolverine, and eventually the X-Men and Han Solo. And in recent years, I've been doing independent comics, Monstress with Image, Night Eaters through Abrams.
That's perfect. That's your resume. But I don't want to go through a question that I'm sure you have been asked a lot about, but I noticed that you didn't grow up reading comic books,
No.
especially. So, and even though you didn't start writing for comic books because you did like 19 novels before or something like that.
At the same time.
not at the same time. But I wanted to know what, in the end, what drove you to a comic book as an art form and as a form of writing?
Well, when I was growing up, so I'm the daughter of an immigrant. My dad is Chinese, my mom is white. And being a writer was never considered a job. You know, in my family, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, those were the jobs people did. But I was passionate about books when I was growing up. I always loved to read. But again, never saw myself as a writer, even though I would sort of dabble here and there. I never finished anything. And then when I went to college, around the same time I went to college, the X-Men cartoon came out. Now, the one that I think was just re-released, updated.
Yeah, the one which is we have the sequel right now.
Exactly. That the original X-Men cartoon came out on Fox, and I thought that was one of the best things I'd ever seen. I fell in love with the cartoon. I didn't know anything about the X-Men. I had never read comics, but I loved that series. And then when I went away to college, there was a comic book store down the street, and having just come off the animated series, I went into the comic book store, discovered the actual comics, the X-Men, Batman, Wonder Woman, and I became a rabid comic book reader starting around the age of 18. I also started writing fan fiction. I was that person writing X-Men fan fiction, which really taught me a lot about writing. I think if I hadn't started out writing X-Men fanfic, I would not be where I am today, because that taught me how to write stories, in essence. So, but again, I didn't think that could be an actual career. I didn't really see myself as a writer. And it wasn't until after I was a licensed attorney, after I graduated from law school, when I had some free time, that suddenly the writing bug hit me. I think because I was so unhappy about the possibility of living the rest of my life as a lawyer, there was a part of me that was desperate to find something else. And I'd been reading a lot of romance novels throughout law school. And I sat down one day and started writing a romance novel. I wrote my romance novel. I wrote it in a month. I was, possessed. And I ended up selling it, and that began my career. But again, still, I didn't think about comics. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I wrote an X-Men novel for Simon & Schuster. Marvel had signed a licensing deal. And I heard about it through my agent, and I said, well, I love the X-Men. Of course, let me do this. And because the editors at Marvel had to approve the book to make sure the characterization was correct, all of it, the feedback I got was very positive. They said, hey, we like this. We like the work you did. And I thought, well, maybe I could write comics. And so I was at the very first New York Comic-Con, and I introduced myself to the editors at Marvel. And I said, listen, I wrote this X-Men novel, and if you ever need a writer, here I am. I was just like, my whole philosophy is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And so I had to ask. And I didn't actually think they would bite, but they did. And it took a couple years to find the right book, but eventually they gave me NYX, about the mutant teenagers living
in New York.
Yes, exactly. And that started my career at Marvel. And I was writing romance novels, and I was writing comics at Marvel at the same time. And I did this more or less for almost 8 years before I took a break from writing novels and just focused primarily on comics.
What was the difference that you had to learn in terms of writing from the prose to comic books? What was really the most striking difference between those two kinds of writing? And was it hard to adjust to comics?
Well, what was interesting was, fortunately for me, I'm a very visual writer anyway, and that helps. The transition wasn't as bad as I thought it would be because I'm a visual writer, but I did have to learn a new form, because when you're writing prose, I mean, to put it sort of bluntly, in some ways you're not vomiting words on a page, but it's
that's a sweet image.
You're like, you're pouring yourself on a page. It's not a collaboration. You're wholly responsible for building everything and for basically creating a telepathic bond between yourself and a reader. But with comics, you're not doing that as collaboration. You're working with an artist. And so half of the burden has been taken from you. And it's remembering that half the burden has been taken from you. That's really important. And so for me, I had to learn how to keep stories to the essentials. And the essential of a story is character, conflict, and world. Those are the building blocks. I had to worry about building character and building conflict and building world just in a script. But I also knew then that there was someone else who would pick up the slack, who would do the art. And so I was, in essence, writing for two people, writing for the artist, but then also writing for the reader. Because a reader will never read the script, they'll read the story. And so it's everything gets pared down in ways that is not possible with a novel. And I thought it would be very difficult to do because I was teaching myself more or less how to do it. But I got some very good mentorship from my editor at Marvel, John Barber. And with that mentorship and with sort of keeping the mindset that I was not alone in this, that this was a collaboration, I think I didn't feel that stressed out. I was like, all right, I can do this. I can figure out how to do this. This is how you write a script. This is what a script looks like. That's easy. The mechanics of a script, easy. I know stories. I know these characters. Let me just tell the best story I can, and then I will figure out the mechanics of the script writing, the format. And that's how I approached it. I just threw myself into it very passionately, very driven. And
you were like thinking like, no matter what happens, we'll see.
I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
I told myself I have done the impossible thing. I've gotten my foot in the door at Marvel Comics.
I won't get it back.
I'm not going to let go of this. I'm going to do the best possible job I can. I'm going to work as hard as I can and make the most of this opportunity. And I will just learn as I go. And that's exactly what I did. And I didn't allow myself to think about being afraid. I didn't think about self-doubt. I just told myself, I got this opportunity, I'm going to do it. And I think that mindset really, really helped me. And it actually helped me learn faster because I was engaged and excited to have that opportunity. And I wasn't afraid.
Okay. Do you remember the first time you met virtually or IRL with Sana Takeda? Because that's I guess that your collaboration on X23
Yes.
was the spark that lifted the fire that is Monstress
Yes.
and the Night Eaters. So do you remember that first time?
It was early on when it would have been, I didn't communicate directly with her when she did those first fill-in pages that I think it was in issue 3 of X23. She was invited to do maybe 5 fill-in pages. And those pages to me were extraordinary because they really captured the moment, the pathos of the moment. You know, it's young X23, young Laura in the lab being experimented on. And she captured that so beautifully and so powerfully. And I was very struck by that. And I knew that I wanted to work with her again, but it wasn't until the regular artist left X23 and I requested Sana to come on as one of the regular artists. It wasn't until that happened that I started emailing her directly. And our initial emails, I think were very, like, there wasn't much to them because we didn't know each other then. But
something clicked at some point.
Clicked. I think what clicked for us, I think the first bond was story and visuals. We communicated with each other via script and art. And I was a huge admirer of her, and I had a real powerful sense of what she could do. And every time she would turn pages in, it was like magic. I just felt completely inspired to tell bigger and better stories for these characters every time I saw her art, which was so emotional. Her art really captures the emotions of characters very, very well. And so I was very inspired by that. And so even though we didn't know each other and we really didn't have any direct conversations, I felt like we were communicating with each other via story, via the work that we were doing. And the first really big conversation we had in person was in Tokyo. After I had approached her to start working on Monstress, at Image. And we had lunch in Tokyo. I was there for other reasons. And that was like the first really like long, that was the first long conversation we'd had in person. And again, we were still kind of getting to know each other, both admiring each other. But I think for me, I was very hopeful about what could happen. But again, we're not mind readers. We can't, we can't read the future. We don't know what's going to happen. But I had a good feeling. I had a very good feeling about what might be possible.
And so I guess she was your first choice when you had the first idea for Monstress. Did you
for
also
Monstress,
recall,
yes.
Because it's almost 10 years now that Monstress.
It's been almost, yeah.
It
oh my gosh,
was
it has.
2015,
Yeah,
the first issue. So I guess that maybe you just had an idea in mind and you knew that you would have to ask Sana first to develop it into a comic book.
Yeah, no, I had an idea, and I hope Sana would say yes as an artist. But again, the idea was, I thought, I think you heard me talking earlier about how the original idea for Monstress was just, there's a girl.
Yeah, I was trying to get it into the podcast because the other people weren't to the panel before.
Yeah, no, and it's the original idea for Monstress was that there's a girl who has survived a war, and there's a monster living inside of her, that she has or there's not a monster living inside of her. The original idea is she has a psychic connection to a monster. But in the original version, the monster was external. It was almost like a roaming kaiju type, creature. And as I was working on this, I had a very difficult time trying to create a human story at the scale of a 300-foot tall monster. That's not an easy thing to do. One imagines it would be, but it's not. And it wasn't until Sana started delivering concept art, beautiful concept art showing these ghostly, spirits that fill the sky, that I suddenly realized that this was a possession story and that this was a ghost story. And that's when the whole thing changed for me, and I was able to fully sit down and develop Monstress. But up until then, I really was spinning my wheels. I had the idea, and the idea felt originally very flashy to me, and I was like, yeah, this is cool, I'm energetic. But then when I really sat down to try and do it, it was very difficult, and it required the intervention of her art for me to really understand what this was about and what I needed to do.
And in terms of the visual elements that Sana did, how much input did you have to, I would say, blend some kind of more Oriental elements or Asian elements to a more American culture?
Well, I didn't give her much initially to go on. What I said was I wanted this to be an Asian-centric book.
So that was still
very much
a point.
Yeah, most fantasies. Most fantasies are very Eurocentric, and I wanted the focus of this to be very Asian, representing the fact that she's Japanese and the fact that I'm half Chinese. And so, I wanted that. I said Art Deco, I want Art Nouveau, steampunk, kaiju, yokai.
Can I say tarot cards maybe or not?
Huh?
Tarot cards?
No, actually. No,
Okay.
that wasn't even part of it. At least not for me, from my end. And so those, I just gave her keywords basically. And then I said, okay, just go and express your wildest self. Just, whatever it is you've been dying to do, whatever comes out of you just from these keywords, let's just see what happens. And the wild thing was that what you see on the page today in the first volume is more or less what immediately emerged from her. There were no edits or suggestions from me. What she created initially is what you see now on the page, without any edits, without any changes. Sana's, I think, I'm very lucky to be working with Sana. I've never met anyone with a vision like hers. It's a very, very powerful vision, and what she expresses on the page, I don't know. It's something that's very unique and special, and so and what she created in those original concept pages just blew me away and changed everything.
I had a feeling after reading the first volume that maybe it could have been just the single story, because the end of the first volume is quite open-ended. And I wanted to know how much did you plan in advance, in case of success, to go for the long-term story that is now Monstress?
I always knew that I wanted to tell a big, complex, epic fantasy. Something that could not be easily contained in one volume, something that would just be sprawling, and not so sprawling in that one loses the thread, but that there's a sense for the reader that this is part of a much bigger universe, and so I wrote volume 1. Honestly, I didn't think about whether or not it would fail. I just wrote volume 1 with the intention that there would be multiple volumes. And I always like to have a beginning and end in everything I do. But at the same time, it was always my goal that this would be a long-running book. And that was the energy I poured into volume 1, and sort of the intentionality behind it as well.
But are you still, because it's still like we have issue 52, I guess.
Yeah, issue 52 is coming out, or did come out. We're working. This is going to be volume 9 that we're publishing, and I more or less, I think, I used to say it was certainty, and now I'm not so sure. But I think I know how the book ends.
I noticed in an interview 3 years ago, you already knew what the ending was going to be. So
yeah, I just don't know how long it will take to get there.
But I wanted to know how much you planned in advance the plots, the different storylines, and the twists. Because we learn so much in every story arc. There are so much new characters, new developments, new twists, and this seems to be really huge of a writing process. So I don't know how that works.
Well, some of it was planned out well in advance, and some of it. Listen, the best laid plans always go awry. So I had a lot of plans for the characters. I had a lot of ideas for the characters. And then as I would write, my imagination would just veer in a completely different and surprising direction. Or Sana would deliver art that would be so fantastic. Like a character design, for example, that'd be so fantastic that it would take me in a completely different direction as well. So, for example, the fox girl Kippa was never supposed to be a major character in the book. She was not part of the long-term plan, but Sana's art for her was so amazing, was so emotive, so expressive that I was like, I can't, this character must live. Suddenly, Kippa became the most important character in the book, simply because of the way Sana drew her. And so, did I have plans? Yes. Did a lot of them get thrown out? Yes, because of the art, because of the way I would get inspired. And I think that's still the case. I have plans. I have ideas for where this is going. But I am not too attached to them because I know that they could change. They could change at any given moment depending on what Sana turns in and depending on how I feel inspired given the way the story goes.
You give yourself the freedom of going where you wouldn't have go or thought going, even though you still have to keep some lines and not keep coherence. And I wanted also to know because you have such dark characters. Even Maika is not really likable.
Oh no, she's not likable.
She's quite horrible for some instance.
Yeah.
And do you think stories work better if we have really flawed characters?
Oh, I think flawed characters are so interesting. I mean, listen, I think I really love writing unlikable women. I really like writing women who, Maika's not likable, but why would she be? She's suffered a lot. Has a lot of hard edges. In my mind, when Maika was a child, she was more like Kippa. But life was very difficult. Her mother was very difficult. She survived a war. And so Maika became who she is because of her life experiences and because of the way she was raised. But that's not how she started. And I think that flawed characters, characters who have to work at finding themselves, who have to work at finding goodness in the world, who have to work at becoming better, are really, really interesting. I think, sure, I've written characters, and I do write characters that start out, they're nice, they're likable, and that's great too. But everyone requires a journey where they're forced to confront themselves. Even a nice, likable character must go on a journey in which they are forced to confront whether or not being nice and likable is going to let them survive and keep them going in this world, whether they can maintain that sense of goodness within themselves, or whether parts of it have to be shed in order to live and thrive. And Maika's journey is just the opposite. She's someone who has already shed anything that was good, anything that was likable, anything that was kind in order to survive. And her job now is to reconstitute herself and find those parts of herself she had to throw away and bring them back and reintegrate. And so her journey is just the opposite.
And another thing that is really striking in Monstress is how the family structure is not safe at all.
No.
Like you cannot count on your father, on your mother, even. Do you have something against the familial
Not at all.
structures?
I love family. As I say it so earnest, I love family. I really do. But I think if we look at stories, if we look at horror stories, if any story, families are the original site of horror. They really are the original site of horror. And not because families are terrible, but because families, because we love them and because they are the closest people to us, can inflict the most pain and they can do the most damage. Or they can do the most good. It just depends. And we can't control the families we get. We're just born into them. And it's like playing the lottery. Sometimes you get a great family. Sometimes you get a terrible one. Sometimes you get a middling family. We don't know what we're going to get. Just like parents don't know what children they're going to get. It goes both ways. It's not just one or the other. And I think that stories around family are very interesting, and they can be a very good source of conflict. And in Monstress, I think not everyone, but I think there will be people who read Monstress who can identify with maybe not with the extremes, because they are extremes, but having a mother who thinks that she owns her daughter, who thinks that she owns everything that her daughter does, and tries to a mother who controls every movement of her daughter and tries to mold her daughter into who she wants her to be. I think there are many people who will identify with that. I think there will be many people who identify with the absentee father who suddenly comes back after many years
and tries to gain control also.
And tries to also influence the daughter or control her or say, I know what's best. Your mother didn't know what's best, but I know what's best. And I think that if one can strip away the magic and the old gods and everything like that, at the base level, what you find are very familiar stories about families that are not too strange, in fact.
And even that if you strip all the magic and stuff, it's a story about everyone trying to just control the body, literally the body,
the body,
and what Micah is going to do. And it's not only the family, but also like we would say political structure.
Exactly.
And I guess that was also a standing point that you wanted to tell in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to create a story that could be read on multiple levels. If you want just an epic fantasy in which there's talking cats and there's witch nuns and there's old gods and there's cute fox girls, you can read Monstress for that. It's a rollicking adventure. But if you want to read deeper and find a story about politics, colonialism, family, racism, then Monstress provides that as well.
Okay. Do you have something against cats?
I love cats. Because I'm a cat person.
That was really a question.
I'm obsessed with cats.
Because they're traitors, and that's how they are described in Monstress, like really like horrible creatures that are just thinking about themselves and that would betray you. And so I just wanted to know, if that was just something that you had against cats.
I love cats. I'm a crazy cat person. I used to have 5 cats. I just find cats endlessly fascinating. And so for me, I mean, if I find a character endlessly fascinating, beware, because, I will put them through the most. But for me, as in life, as in fiction, I find cats just to be fascinating creatures that you can never predict what they're going to do. And they are the masters of their own destiny. And so I just put that into the book, more or less.
I noticed also something, and maybe it's just my point of view, but the book isn't really shy on horror. There's a lot of horror elements, but even though you have like some sexuality, it's quite shy on the nudity. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know if that was something that you had in mind when you did this book, because I know that the American comic books field can be quite more difficult than what we have in France or Europe.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that was a deliberate choice, not because of prudishness, but because I feel like in American comics, I had just come out of Marvel, where I felt like women were constantly being objectified with massive breasts and massive asses and always like the strangest poses where, and
you can see the chest and the bottom.
And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But what I wanted to tell a different story where the female body was not objectified in the same way, and so that was a very deliberate choice, that we were going to portray female bodies, but not in the way that that Sana and I had experienced them at Marvel Comics or within, like superhero comics.
And even so, and that's one question I had also for Sana, that the first page of Monstress is
Yes.
a young girl naked with an arm missing and in
Yes.
chains.
Yes.
And also, it really struck me like this is a really strong debut. And even in the creator-owned field, if you are let's not say afraid, but if you were maybe a little bit afraid of the reaction that such a strong image could do to the readers.
You know what? I wasn't afraid of the reaction because I knew that I was trying to do a lot of different things with that page. Because what's very important about that page is Micah's expression, the look on her face, and also a little bit of the lettering too, which, gives a sense that, she's on a mission. But the look on her face is disdainful and powerful and unafraid. Even though she's in this situation, we wanted to create an image in which she projects strength and like she's fully in control. No matter what it appears, that this is a young woman who knows what she's about and is confident in her strength. And then the other thing that mattered to me was the fact that in real life, I think there are many times when people avert their gazes when they see something that makes them uncomfortable. And so, for example, if you are disabled, if you're in a wheelchair, if you're missing a limb, so often, like people will avert their gazes and just look over your head, not look directly at you. The same thing happens in certain areas if you're a person of color in America. My dad, for example, Chinese American living in the Midwest, people will often ignore him when he talks to them. They will look past him. They will, even though he speaks perfect English, they will pretend not to understand him. There is a cloak of invisibility that happens under certain circumstances. And the thing is,
still today, or was it when
still to this day. Okay. And so that first page is about forcing the viewer to see. You cannot look away from that first page. You cannot look away from the fact that she's missing an arm. You cannot look away from her situation. You cannot look away. And yet it's a powerful image because of her strength, because of that look in her eye, her disdain. And so that page was very intentional and was meant to do many, many things. Whether or not the reader necessarily understands it consciously, my hope is that unconsciously anyway, when you see that image, that there's a part of that's working on the reader in many ways.
Well, that's a success, I guess.
Thank you.
And I wanted to know also, so you already said that you had the ending planned, but
Yes.
you don't know when you're going to end the actual things. But how do you reflect on the length of Monstress? Because doing a creator-owned book more than 50 issues long, it's been rare. Do we say rarer? I don't know. It's quite rare now.
It's quite rare, yeah.
Yeah, and it's been almost the case because now we see a lot of mini-series or limited series. And not so many ongoings. And I wanted to know, do you think that if Monstress was to be out to today, could it be an ongoing as a?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I think we got very lucky. We were at the right place at the right time. And if it was published today, I'm actually not sure. But I do know that Sana and I aren't concerned about the length. What we're concerned about is just telling the best story we can. And we will take as much time as we need to tell that story. We are doing other stories that are limited. We did the Night Eater series, and that's just 3 books. And
I don't know how you found the time to do both.
That's all Sana.
3 books.
Listen,
you'd still have to write it.
Yeah, no, I wrote that first book in 4 days. It was a 4-day blitz during the pandemic in which I just laid on the couch and I had an idea and I wrote. I don't know what happened. It's a blur. I was out of my mind and out of my body when I wrote that book, but I was inspired. That happens sometimes. I get inspired, and something will pour out of me, and that's what happened with the first book of Night Eaters. And Sana, we had been talking for a while about we didn't want to take a break from Monstress. We
Not
felt,
like what Brian and Fiona did for Saga.
I think some people could do that and still get back into the story. I know for me as a writer, if I took a long break from Monstress, I might have trouble finding the thread again. It's important for me to live with Micah and stay with that story because I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to get back to it if I took a break. But also as creators, we get bored and we're trying to do new things. And Night Eaters was an opportunity to try something different. And Sana was like, yes. Sana was the one who brought up trying something, adding a second project. And that ended up being our second project.
Okay. Do you see yourself going to Monstress 100?
Oh yeah, I think that could happen.
All right.
I think that could happen.
Okay, but then we'll have more to chat maybe next time
okay.
to discuss about it.
But
our time is up. Thank you very much, Marjorie. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much.